Hey, hello everyone. Oops, I just noticed that it already went to the first slide. All right, so if anyone's here, can you see me and hear me, everything okay? If there's anyone here, I'm not sure. All right, but okay, so today I'm going to do a presentation on the Unit 1 FRQ for AP Psychology. And just like a refresher, Unit 1 is about like the history and approaches of psychology. So like some of the basic history facts about like how psychology came to be, some important figures, as well as some of the important theories, or not really theories, but the perspectives, like the biological, the sociocultural, etc., etc. So that is what Unit 1 is about. So today we're going to be doing FRQ specifically for that unit. All right, so don't forget to follow @Fiveable on social media. Follow on Twitter, on Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube. See, think Fiveable. All right, so here are just some upcoming events that you guys should keep an eye out for. Some really interesting things are happening in the psychology streams. So coming soon, we have an intro to biological basis of behavior with Mary Valdez, September 21st, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we have neurons and neurotransmitters with Ms. Megan Rivolo, 8 p.m. September 23rd. And then lastly, we have Learn to Alter Your Brain Chemistry with Emily Pedazzi, 8 p.m. September 24th. So be sure to mark these on your calendar and keep an eye out for some future psychology streams, because a lot of upcoming streams are happening in the next couple of weeks, so just keep an eye out for them. All right, so in this stream, we're going to cover some basic questions like, what is an FRQ? Does anyone know what an FRQ is or what it stands for? Okay, well, an FRQ is an acronym that means pre-response question. So that is what an FRQ is. It is a free response question. And today in this stream, we're going to learn how to write an FRQ. I know there was an earlier stream with Ms. Rivolo about how to write an FRQ, but in this stream, I'm just going to be reinstilling those points that she addressed in the last stream, just so you didn't forget, so we can just continue to go over those and reinforce those, how to write an FRQ, because it's very important to have a strong score on the AP exam. If you have to be able to write an FRQ because it is worth a pretty decent amount of the overall exam score. So it's a very important skill to have for the test. And then lastly, we are going to do a practice FRQ today, just to sort of reinstill how to write an FRQ and how to write an FRQ with certain content-related FRQ. So the Unit 1 FRQ is what we are going to be doing today. All right, so now I'm just going to go into some background information about an FRQ. Hello to everyone who just joined. So I'm going right now doing some background about an FRQ, and later on we're going to do a practice FRQ in this stream for the people that just joined. All right, so an FRQ, like I said earlier, is a free response question. And for the AP Psychology exam, remember that the FRQ is worth 33.3% of the overall exam score, which is very significant. If you don't do very well in the FRQ, your chances of having one score can go down all the way to the next score. So if you really bomb the FRQ, you can go from a 5 to a 4, a 4 to 3, etc., etc. So make sure that you can master the FRQ, because it's very important for your overall AP score. And the FRQ can have 7 parts, asking different types of questions. And remember that the FRQ is not an essay. It is a free response question, but it needs to be very short, concise, and to the point. You don't have to write an elaborate essay. This is not AP Lang, it's AP Psychology. They just want you to know that you know the concept, so you do not need to write an essay. And remember that you only have 50 minutes to answer. So therefore, I recommend wearing a watch. I always wear a watch when I take an exam. The College Board will allow you to wear a watch as long as it doesn't make any noise or anything. So I highly recommend that you wear a watch so you can keep track of your time. But remember that you don't have much time to waste. You have to answer the 7 parts for 2 questions. So make sure that you're using your time efficiently and not wasting too much time on one question, if that makes sense. So yeah, you only have 50 minutes to answer. That's very important because time goes by really, really fast when you're taking an exam. All right, so now we're going to go into how to actually write an FRQ, okay? So this is what to do on the AP Psychology FRQ. So this is things that you want to do. You do want to write in pen. And some people worry about, oh, if I write in pen, I might make a mistake. That's completely okay. Just cross it out, a clean line through the word or the sentence that you make a mistake on, and then move on. Also, make sure that you do write incomplete sentences. Even though you're not writing an essay, you still want to have complete thoughts in your writing so that the grader can understand what you're trying to say. So yes, write incomplete sentences. Also, respond to the prompt in order. Once again, it makes it easier to grade. So start from the very top question to the very bottom question. First question to last question. And skip a line after each question. Once again, it just makes everything clear and easier to grade, and therefore it just makes it clean and you can go back and check and make sure you've answered all the questions. So overall, skipping a line is just very beneficial. All right, so once again, I'm going to go over how to write an FRQ. This is some more continuation, but this is going to be what not to do on the FRQ. So these are the things that you do not want to do. You do not want to write a conclusion or an introduction. Like I said several times before, the FRQ is not a formal essay, so you don't need to have a conclusion or an introduction. Just make sure you answer the questions that they ask. Also, do not spend too much time on terms you are unsure about. Just move on. Because if you waste too much time on a term you're not sure about, that time could have been spent on terms that you know about. So you don't want to waste time and not be able to answer the easier questions that you may already know. So yes, make sure you use your time very, very efficiently. That's why I recommend a watch, because it makes it so much better. It makes it so much easier to keep track of time. So yeah, just make sure you are using your time efficiently. Okay, so I have like a little acronym sort of to help you remember how to write an FRQ. And you can say it however you want to say it. You can call it IDA, you can call it idea, EDA, whatever it helps, however it helps you remember it. But first, remember the I meaning identify. So within the question, identify topics and concepts within the question. And then D, define. Define vocabulary words in the questions and form definitions. So in the questions, they'll use certain vocabulary words, and you want to make sure you define those vocabulary words. And then lastly, A, which means apply. Just don't define the word. You're not going to get credit just for defining the word. You also have to apply it to the situation that they give you. They may give you a situation, and you have to give further analysis and explain how that term is relevant for the given situation. So yes, remember IDA, idea, identify, I, define, D, apply, A. And this will help you remember how to write an FRQ when you take the test. Just remember IDA, and this should help you. A little basic of the FRQ, how to write an FRQ. Does anyone have any questions or unclear about anything or how to write an FRQ before we actually get into the FRQ practice? Just let me know if you want me to go over anything else before we actually go into writing it. Okay, cool. So I didn't see any comments from anyone, so I hope we're all good on understanding everything so far. Okay, so now I'm going to read the FRQ question. So, Professor Vang believes that weight and exercise are negatively correlated. She is completing research into this hypothesis using local university students. All participants are weighed at the beginning of the study. She instructs half of the participants to not exercise and eat their normal daily diet for 6 weeks. The other participants are required to exercise for 60 minutes 5 times per week while maintaining their regular diet. At the end of the study, Professor Vang, will compare the weights of all participants. All right, so here is like the scenario that I mentioned, how they'll give you a scenario and you have to answer different parts about it. So yes, here's the scenario, and I want to go over each part. I want to read each part, and then we're going to do each part separately. All right, so Part A is asking to draw and correctly label a scatter plot that supports Professor Vang's hypothesis that weight and exercise are negatively correlated. So this is asking for an image just to draw and label a scatter plot. Okay, so that's Part A. All right, and Part B. Part B is to explain how the following, let me put the next part on too. All right, so Part B, explain how the following should be used in Professor Vang's experiment to ensure accurate data and outcomes. So we have two terms here, random assignment and operational definition. So Part B is asking us to explain how random assignment and operational definitions could be used to ensure that there are accurate data and outcomes for the experiment. All right, so I just pasted the scenario here again for convenience, but I'm going to read the other parts as well. Okay, so now we have Part C. Part C says, identify at least one ethical concern that could arise as a result of this experiment. And then Part D is asking, at the end of the experiment, Professor Vang finds inclusive results to her hypothesis. She presents her findings at a conference on the psychology of eating. How might the following types of psychologists explain these results? So you have to explain how a sociocultural psychologist might explain the results, how a biological psychologist, sorry, this is kind of blocking it right here. I'm trying to move that. How a biological psychologist may explain the results. And lastly, how a humanistic psychologist may explain the results of her research. All right, so these were all the parts of the question, and now we're going to actually answer them. So first, let's just remember IDA, identify, define, and apply. So first, from this just question, we can identify some concepts and topics. If we see here, for some concepts, we see negatively correlated, hypothesis, we see research, we have random assignment, operational definitions, and then we also have, we also have ethical concerns, and then we also have some of the different perspectives in psychology. So here we can already identify some very key topics and concepts within the questions, which will make it easier for us to answer them later. All right, so is everything clear to everyone right now? If not, I can just always explain something else. All right, okay, I think everyone's good then. Okay, so now we're going to answer Part A. I'm going to put Part A back up here. So, draw and correctly label a scatter plot that supports Professor Vang's hypothesis that weight and exercise are negatively correlated. So I'm going to share a different screen with you guys. So I'm going to share a different screen. Hold on. All right, so can everyone see this? It should be a blank page for the drawing. Can everyone see it? All right, well, I hope you should be able to see it then. So I'm just going to go over the negative correlation. So what do you guys think it will look like? So remember the question said, prove Professor Vang's hypothesis that weight and exercise are negatively correlated, and label the axes with the correct labels. So let's just go ahead and make the X and Y axes. And this is weight versus exercise. All right, so how might a negatively correlated, let me label the X and Y axes as well. Okay, so down here we could have, right here we could have weight. Perhaps in kilograms. And then down here we could have exercise per week. So I'm going to label this exercise per week. Maybe in minutes. All right, so cool. So we've already done the first part. We've labeled the y-axis and we labeled the x-axis. Okay, so how might it look if it's supposed to be negatively correlated? So if weight and exercise are negatively correlated, how do you think this graph might look? Anybody have any ideas, like what the slope would be? Would it be positive, negative? How would the dots be arranged? Would the dots be all over the place? Would they be in one line going this way or one line going that way? What do you guys think? All right, cool. So Tucker Neal says the slope would be negative. That is absolutely correct. So if we're having a negative if she's proving Professor Vang, if she's proving that weight and exercise are negatively correlated, then we should see a negative slope. So it might look something like this. All right, so we have some dots, some points all over, but they're pretty close to each other, going in a negative direction. And then we can have a line of best fit going this way. Like this. With some points on the graph. All right, so this is how you would draw it on the AP test if they ask you to draw a scatter plot. You would say, okay, well, I'm comparing weight versus exercise, and if she is correct, then here I have weight on the y-axis, exercise on the x, and if she's correct that they're negatively correlated, then this is how the scatter plot should look. All right, great. So that's how you would answer that. But also, just to be clear, let's also do let's just pretend that it was positively correlated. How would it look if it was positively correlated? How would the points be arranged on the graph? All right, the slope would be positive. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So yeah, it would be like this. Positive correlation. Be going in this direction. We would have some points, not exactly all in a straight line, but pretty close to each other. And then a line of best fit somewhere here connecting some of the points. Oops, sorry, that wasn't a very straight line. But yeah, I think you should. Yeah, I think you get the point then. Is everybody clear on that? What it would look like? And then lastly, if there was no correlation between weight and exercise, the graph will look like this. I'll show you how the graph will look if they said, how about if there was no correlation? So if the AP question asks you to draw a graph that shows no correlation, you should draw it like this. Okay, so why does this graph show no correlation? Well, because the points are going in no sort of direction or have no sort of form. So no correlation will look like this. They're not going positively or negatively. They just have no sort of form or direction. So yeah, it's simple enough just to be able to, draw the scatter plot and explain and have not explain, but have your axes labeled. And yeah, that's all the AP test would like to see, and that would be worth the point. All right, cool. So now I'm going to go back to sharing the slides for the screen. Sharing the slides for the PowerPoint. All right, can everyone see the slides again? They should be up now. All right, so you should be able to see the slides. Ooh. Okay, so yeah, I drew the images much clearer. I just wanted to do it with you guys so we could go over it together and so you could share how you think it would look. But this is how it would look. Once again, negative correlation. We see downwards direction here. Exercise per week in minutes, and then weight kilograms. Once again, like remember they asked you to label everything, so make sure you have labels. If you didn't have labels, then they wouldn't understand what this is showing, so make sure you have labels. When I say they, I mean the graders of the test. And then positively correlated, we see positive slope going in this direction, and then no correlation. Once again, we see these sort of dots with sort of no exact form. All right, cool. So now we're going to talk. Okay, so now we're going to answer part B. So I'll read the question again for people that just joined. So Professor Vang believes that weight and exercise are negatively correlated, and she is completing research into this hypothesis using local university students. All participants are weighed at the beginning of the study. She instructs half of the participants to not exercise and eat their normal daily diet for 6 weeks. The other participants are required to exercise for 60 minutes, 5 times per week, while maintaining their regular diet. At the end of the study, Professor Vang will compare the weights of all the participants. So part B asks us to explain how the following should be used in Professor Vang's experiment to ensure accurate data and outcomes. And for the people that just joined, I'll show you the acronym again of how we answer FRQs. So remember IDA. Identify topics in the questions, define the words, and form definitions, and just don't define the words, but also apply them to the given scenario. So now we're going to use IDA now to answer part B. Oops. All right. Sorry, I'm just skipping the rest. I can show you back to part B. Okay. So explain how the following should be used in Professor Vang's experiment to ensure accurate data and outcomes. So remember the I, identify the concepts and topics. So we can see that this question is asking about random assignment and operational definitions. So there we have identified them. Now we have to define them. Can someone give me the definition for random assignment? Or the definition for operational definitions, which either one you know. It doesn't matter. If anyone can give me a definition for either of those words or either of those terms. Okay, so maybe you guys are not sure because I didn't see anybody comment anything about the terms, but that's totally fine because we're gonna answer this, and we're gonna go over these two terms. All right, so random assignment is when participants have an equal chance of being placed into any group, any experimental group. So a sample answer, now that we know the definition, how do you think Professor Vang could use random assignment in her experiment to assure that there are accurate data and outcomes? So how could Professor Vang use random assignment in her experiment? Does anyone have any ideas of how she could use random assignment? Remembering that random assignment is when participants have an equal chance of being placed into any group. Is there any sort of methodology or anything that she could use to place people into random groups? Any ideas? Okay, so a possible answer for the part B for this part is that Professor Vang could use random assignment in her experiment by having someone make the placements of the students into two groups random. So having an external person doing this part. So for example, she could have an individual write down the names of every participant and place it in a hat. And then like have two buckets, have a bucket called experimental group, the group that has to work out and has to have do they have to have a restrictive diet? Or has to work, no, they have their same diet. So the group that has to work out. And then another bucket have the control group, which is people that continue with their normal diet. So then put the names in the hat, pull one out, and then put one in the experimental group, take another one out, put it in control group, experimental group, control group, experimental group, control group. So it's completely random. Everyone has an equal chance of being put in either side because you just go back and forth, putting them into experimental and then control. So therefore it's random. And why I said another individual, because if it's Professor Vang, she could be biased later on when she reviews the research because she could remember that name and say, oh, well, I put them in that box, I put them in this box. So it sort of helps to limit the bias and to make the research as accurate as possible. So yeah, I said this makes her experiment more reliable because it protects her experiment from some bias when she later looks at the results. So that's a very simple answer. You see, it's not like a super long paragraph. I didn't have an introduction, no conclusion. I just answered exactly what they wanted me to do. I identified the part they wanted me to answer, I defined it, and then I applied it to the situation. Does anybody have any questions about that, how I answered this part? Okay, so no questions for random assignment. Okay, now the next definition was, the next term was operational definitions. Oh, and sorry, I just put full answer here. I just basically reworded what I had here. It's just basically the same. So random assignment is when participants have an equal chance of being placed into a group. Professor Vang should use random assignment in her experiment by having someone make the placements of the students into two groups by random, by placing their names in the hat. This makes her experiment more reliable because it protects her experiment from some bias when she later looks at the results. So you see, it's a very simple, concise answer, but it's also very specific to the scenario. All right, now we're going to answer the second part, which asked about operational definitions. Ooh, oh, sorry, I don't even know the order of my own slides, my bad. Okay, so now I want to just clear up two terms, random selection versus random assignment. Sometimes people get them mixed up, but they are not interchangeable. Random selection and random assignment are two very different things. So Random assignment is what we just talked about. It's choosing participants for experimental groups, and everyone has an equal chance of being chosen, whereas random selection is choosing participants for the experiment, and once again, they have an equal chance of being chosen. Does that make sense to everyone? Those two terms make sense? So random selection is choosing people for the experiment. For random assignment, you've already chosen people for the experiment. Now you're just trying to place them in different groups, the experimental groups and the control groups. Does that make sense? So yeah, this image here, like I mentioned earlier, put the names in the hat. This technique could be used for both random selection, also as random assignment, because with the names in the hat, it makes sure everyone has an equal chance of being chosen. So no questions about that or anything? Everyone's clear about random selection versus random assignment, because people do get these mixed up, and you can be tricked also on the multiple choice, but also on, you may forget all the FRQs, so make sure that you distinguish the two, because they are not interchangeable. All right, cool. So now we will answer the second part of the FRQ, which asks about operational definitions. Can anyone in the chat define operational definitions? Does anyone know what that term means? Okay, so if you're unsure, that's completely fine. We're going to go over it. So operational definitions are terms/procedures that describe the research variables of an experiment. So, and the question asks, once again, so remember, IDA, we identify that they're asking about operational definitions. Then we define operational definitions, which are terms/procedures that describe the research variables of an experiment. So we use the I, we use the D, and now we have to use A, which is apply it to the scenario. Okay, so how could Professor Vang use operational definitions in her research? I know I have an example up here already, but does anyone else have like an idea of how you think she could use operational definitions in her research? Any other examples or anything? Remember that they're research variables that describe the research variables of an experiment. If that doesn't make sense to you, please let me know so I can reword it or help you any way that you need help with understanding that part. Okay, so Professor Vang could use operational definitions in her research by simply defining what the experiment considers to be exercise. Because if you go back to the question, here it just says that Professor Wang believes that weight and exercise are negatively correlated, okay? So she has participants, they're all weighed at the beginning of the study. She instructs half not to exercise and eat their normal diet, and then the other half to exercise for 60 minutes. If I was a researcher and I wanted to do the same research that Professor Vang did to sort of prove or disprove the research that she did, I would need operational definitions to be able to perform the research. But here it's sort of unclear as to what exercise could be. It's not specific enough. Some people may consider exercise to be a 60-minute walk outside because it says 60 minutes. So exercise could be 60 minutes of walking. Could it be playing Wii U? Could it be on the treadmill or weightlifting or cardio? You know, it has to be very specific as to what type of exercise, because everyone has a different idea of what exercise could be. So in order to make the research easy to copy, basically easy to redo, would be to have clear operational definitions. And for that, she could have an operational definition for exercise. And the operational definition that put on the board for exercise is, so the operational definition I put on the board for exercise is that the experiment could be that 60 minutes of exercise is 60 minutes of cardio with a heartbeat of 130 plus, and not 60 minutes of just simply walking around the park. So there I was very specific about what exercise could be defined as, because that's what operational definitions are, describing research variables, making them more clear so that another researcher could easily copy their research or do it again to sort of either prove or disprove Professor Vang's conclusion. Would operational definitions also theoretically make seeing patterns in the data easier? Well, I mean, it sort of depends, because if it's for someone else who's doing the research, because remember, operational definitions will help other people to do the research. So the researcher who does the research already sort of knows what they're looking for. So they know how, so they can tell what the data will look like by knowing what they define exercise as. But if someone else tries to redo the research and they don't have a clear idea of what exercise is or how the exercise was used in the original experiment, they may just have people walk for 60 minutes, and they may not see the same trends that the original researcher did. So like, let's just say Professor Vang does the research and the results are that weight and exercise are positively correlated. But if another researcher did the same experiment, but they only did exercise 60 minutes of just walking around the park, they may not get the same results because it wasn't the same exact type of exercise. Does that make sense? So, all right, cool, great. So yeah, it just makes it clear. And then here, the full answer. Operational definitions are terms, procedures that describe the research variables in an experiment, and she could use the operational definition for her experiment to define what is considered exercise. Make sure you specifically say what exercise can be considered as. And therefore, if you answer the question like this on the AP test, you will get a point, because we identified the definition and the concept, we defined the definition, and then we applied it to the situation by explaining how 60 minutes of exercise could be a heartbeat of 130 plus of cardio and not just walking around the park. So make sure you're very specific, because remember, again, it's not an essay, but you want to make sure that the way you apply the scenario is very specific to the scenario. So the way you apply what they're asking is very specific. Oh, here we go. Okay, cool. So once again, I copied the question again. I copied the scenario for convenience so you can read it again. But now we're going to answer part C. So part C says to identify at least one ethical concern that could arise as a result of this experiment. So, does anybody know what an ethical concern is? Could define an ethical concern? All right, so an ethical concern is when researchers may put participants at risk of harm as a result of their participation. So, and the question says to identify at least one ethical concern that could arise as a result of this experiment. So, I put an example of an ethical concern. My example is that in this experiment, a potential ethical concern could be at the end of the research, did not debrief the students to explain her research and clear up any misconceptions. Does anyone know what the word debrief means? Can define the word debrief. Because this is very important for ethical research, is make sure you debrief the individuals, especially if deception is used. Anyone they learned about the ethical guidelines in psychology yet? Could tell me what debrief means? All right, so Caitlin says, explain the background of the experiment. Yep, that is exactly correct. So debrief means to basically say, at the end of the experiment, go up to the students and be like, okay, so here's why I did the research, here's everything I found, here's everything that I did. If you want to know everything about the research, clear up any misconceptions so you know exactly what you participated in, just to make sure that they knew everything that happened throughout the experiment and the research. All right, so lastly, we're almost done. It's very long to answer these FRQs. Remember, you only have 50 minutes to answer them. So you want to make sure you're really good at identifying the topics and definitions, and then so that you can answer them and define them, and then you can apply them. So it's very good to start practicing for the FRQs, because remember, it's also 33.3% of your overall score. So you don't want to do poorly on the FRQ because it can hurt your score out a lot. So make sure that you practice these when you're preparing for the AP test, the AP Psychology test. Okay, so part D says, at the end of the experiment, Professor Vang finds inclusive results to her hypothesis. She presents her findings at a conference on the psychology of eating. How might the following types of psychologists explain these results? So how might a sociocultural psychologist explain Professor Vang's results? How might a biological psychologist explain the results of Professor Vang's research? And lastly, how might a humanistic psychologist explain Professor Vang's research findings? So remember, she finds inconclusive results. And how might these three types of psychologists explain the reason why she had inclusive results? Does anybody have any ideas or want to answer either three or any of the three? Just want to take a guess at it. Like, how might this person explain the results? How might this person, or how might this person? I'll give you guys a couple, a minute or two, because it might take a little bit to type it up. So if anyone has any ideas about either of the three, I'll give you guys a moment. So yep, sociocultural, biological, humanistic, and inclusive results. How might these three people explain inclusive results to her hypothesis? Oh, can you not? You can't see the slides? Let me try to share them again then. All right, can you see them now? Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know. I hope it was up there earlier. That's okay. So here it is now if you want to answer it. There's the question and inclusive results to her hypothesis and these three psychologists. And if you don't know, that's completely cool too. I can just go ahead and go through the answers. Just let me know what you want me to do. If you want to try to answer them, or I can just go through each one and just explain. Okay, so I don't know if I'm not sure if you're typing or not, but it's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and go over the three different types of psychologists anyway. So, okay. So first, sociocultural. A sociocultural psychologist studies how environment affects behavior. They emphasize social and cultural factors outside the individual. So once again, we identified the term sociocultural, then we defined it with this definition here, and now we're going to apply it to this scenario about the conference. So, a sociocultural psychologist may support the inconclusive results by mentioning how the media may influence some individuals in certain societies to keep weight off. So the individual's normal diet can be really restrictive. So within that example, I sort of highlight on the key beliefs of a sociocultural psychologist. So they heavily believe that environment affects behaviors and that culture and other outside factors impact the behavior of an individual. So a sociocultural psychologist hearing this would be like, of course that makes sense, because people see the media displaying a certain image of beauty, and it may influence individuals to want to keep weight off and to not eat as much, so therefore they may restrict their diets. So that makes sense to why you're not seeing conclusive results, because of the media, because of the media's influence on individuals. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, and then biological psychologists. Anybody know what the definition of a biological psychologist is? If you want to reword it differently than mine, I know mine is up here, but if anyone wants to reword it or have another definition for it. Okay, so a biological psychologist studies the biological basis of thoughts, behaviors, and emotion. So basically, they use biology to explain why people behave the way they do, have certain emotions and thoughts. So, at the conference, a biological psychologist may hear the fact that Professor Vang has inconclusive results, and they may think that, of course that makes sense for the results, because different individuals have different genetic factors that predetermine their weight and the amount of weight they're capable of losing. So even if you have the study where you restrict their diets and make them, or no, where you keep the same diet, and make them exercise more, make them exercise 60 minutes a day, they have certain genetic factors that just determine their weight already, and nothing, and that can't be changed by a trial period of just exercise. Does that make sense? Or if you have another definition, or not another definition, but another example that you want to put in the chat, and I can check or anything, then go ahead. Because this is for you guys to just practice, go through the FRQ. So if you want to give me an answer and see if that will work for the scenario, go ahead. I'll check it, I don't mind. Okay, and then lastly, it asks for humanist psychologist. So if you remember from Unit 1, going over the certain perspectives in psychology, a humanist psychologist studies the whole person, and they believe in free will. So therefore, a humanist psychologist may hear the fact that Professor Vang has inconclusive results, and they may say, of course that makes sense, because a humanist psychologist may note that the research shows inconsistencies because the individuals do not feel fulfilled in their lives. Therefore, they are unable to reach their highest potential in their weight loss goals. So if they're not fulfilled, or like if you remember the hierarchy of needs, if they're stuck at some place, they may not be able to achieve the weight loss goal because they just don't feel fulfilled in their lives. So they're just not going to exert the most effort or whatever into their life, into the research program to lose the weight if they don't feel fulfilled. Does that make sense as the explanation? So they're like, yeah, of course it doesn't make sense. They're not fulfilled. How would they be able to reach their highest potential in life, or their highest potential in their weight loss goals if they're not fulfilled already? So that's sort of the rationale for a humanist psychologist. So once again, for this question, we used IDA. We identified the questions and topics. We defined the definition. We defined the topics, and we put them in definitions. We gave the definitions of the different topics and concepts. And then lastly, we used A. We applied the definitions to the given scenario in the question. Remember this overall scenario about Professor Vang? We applied it. We apply the concepts to that general scenario here. So that's basically the basis of how to answer an FRQ. Does anybody have any questions about how to answer an FRQ? Or anything else you want me to go over? I'm going to say remember IDA. And that will help you on the test with answering the different parts of the FRQ. Okay, well, if anyone doesn't have any questions or anything else to ask me or want me to read, if one of the participants wasn't feeling it, is this question considering that maybe they didn't actually work out / try? Well, it's just saying that people have free will. So basically it's saying if people don't feel fulfilled, they're not going to be able to do anything else that well. So basically, yes. It's not necessarily trying. It's sort of like a natural thing. They see the human condition as very natural and believing in free will. So if they see that people are not feeling that they are fulfilled in their lives, they're not going to be able to be successful in any other areas. And this is sort of just an extreme example, but it's just to show, the purpose of this question is to show that you understand what a humanist psychologist is, and to sort of be able to apply like how this person would think about weight loss in terms of what their beliefs are. So it's just making sure that you know what a humanist psychologist is and sort of how they think, so you can sort of give an answer to why they may believe that, if that makes sense. Sure, no problem. Thank you so much for participating. So yeah, if you have any other questions, just let me know before I end this stream. But that's really all I have to say for today. So thank you to everyone who participated in the stream and just watched it. I hope you learned a lot. Remember, you can always replay it and watch it again and go through the different slides. But yeah, I'm glad that you guys came to join me tonight and go over this stream. So yeah, if that's no more questions, I guess that's the end. And remember, there's more upcoming streams for psychology coming up very soon, so keep a lookout. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.